The content of this video is drawn from the sources listed on screen.
Are Jehovah's Witnesses heroes of religious freedom in the courts, but executioners of freedom of conscience within their own organization? In this video, we'll talk about one of the most striking inconsistencies of Jehovah's Witnesses. What I mean by that? For decades, Jehovah's Witnesses fought intense legal battles in defense of religious freedom and freedom of conscience. They did this mainly in countries like the United States and Canada, and thanks to those struggles, they not only secured their own rights, but also those of many other religious groups. In fact, because of the influence of U.S. jurisprudence, those benefits extended to numerous countries around the world. Today, those legal battles are studied in universities across the United States, and witnesses are often presented as pioneers in the defense of religious freedom. In contrast, within their own ranks, Jehovah's Witnesses show zero tolerance toward those who think differently and go as far as severely restricting the freedom of thought and conscience of their own members. In this video, we'll analyze how three major Christian groups deal with internal dissent: the Catholic Church, the Seventh-day Adventist Church, and, of course, Jehovah's Witnesses. So, are Jehovah's Witnesses, as the old saying goes, a saint abroad but a devil at home? Before we begin, if you're new here, let me tell you that the voice you'll hear has been generated with artificial intelligence. However, the content doesn't come from an automated system. It has been written entirely by the creator of this channel. You can call me Nowachi. Within the Protestant world, for many people, the Catholic Church is synonymous with religious intolerance. For some, even a mere mention of it brings to mind images of people burning at the stake, victims of the dreaded Inquisition. And yet, precisely for that reason, it is so interesting to observe how the Catholic Church handles cases of dissent today. I'm not talking about what happened 500 years ago, but about what takes place in contemporary times. The clearest example is that of the Swiss theologian Hans Küng. Küng was a Catholic priest who dedicated his life to theological reflection and interreligious dialogue. But he dared to question one of the most delicate dogmas of the Catholic Church: papal infallibility. It is true that in 1979, he was stripped of his official authorization to teach Catholic theology in the name of the Church. However, and here's the interesting part, Küng was never reduced to the lay state. In fact, he remained a Catholic priest until his death in 2021, free to write, research, and spread his ideas. In other words, the Catholic Church, despite all its historical baggage, chose in the 20th century to limit him institutionally, but not cut him off completely. His voice remained alive both inside and outside the Catholic Church, and today he is remembered as an influential, though uncomfortable, theologian for the Vatican. The most eloquent proof of this came in 2016, when the international press revealed a correspondence between Hans Küng and Pope Francis. Through the Berlin Nunciature, Küng received a letter from the leader of the Catholic Church dated March 20th of that year, whose first words were Lieber Mitbruder, German for dear brother. If we now look at the Protestant world, we find a similar case in the Seventh-day Adventist Church, that of the Australian theologian Desmond Ford. Ford was a highly respected scholar, a professor at Avondale College in Australia, and later also a lecturer in the United States. His problem began when he dared to question one of Adventism's most distinctive doctrines, the so-called investigative judgment, based on the interpretation of Daniel 8 verse 14 in the year 1844. To draw a parallel with Jehovah's Witnesses, it would be as if a circuit overseer taught that there is no biblical support for the teaching that Christ began his reign in heaven in 1914. In 1979, during a conference in California, Ford publicly expressed his doubts about the biblical validity of the teaching that the investigative judgment began in 1844. The impact was so great that the Adventist Church convened a special committee at Glacier View Ranch in 1980 to evaluate his ideas. The result was that he lost his teaching position and was removed from official Adventist instruction. However, he was never stripped of his membership in the Adventist Church. What's more, he remained an Adventist member until his death in 2019, even though he developed an independent ministry called Good News Unlimited, focused on justification by faith. In other words, the Adventist Church, even when it felt challenged on a doctrine it considered fundamental to its identity, did not resort to excommunication. It chose to create institutional distance, but allowed Ford to remain part of the church. And the clearest proof of this is that when he passed away, the Adventist Review, the official magazine of the Seventh-day Adventist Church, dedicated an obituary to him, describing him as a brilliant scholar, a passionate teacher, and a preacher whose memory lived on in his students. Now, in the case of Jehovah's Witnesses, we find a very different outcome in a similar situation. This is about Edward Dunlap, who for many years was the academic head of the Witnesses' only missionary school, the Watchtower's Gilead Bible School, and one of the main contributors to the writing of the organization's Bible Dictionary, Aid to Bible Understanding, the direct predecessor of the still current Insight on the Scriptures. He was also the author of the only complete Bible commentary ever published by the Watchtower, the Commentary on the Letter of James. Dunlap had privately shared, only with trusted friends, his doubts and disagreements about certain official teachings. In the spring of 1980, a committee of 5 men, who weren't even members of the governing body, summoned him in a secret session for just a few hours to interrogate him about his views. After 40 years as a Jehovah's Witness and a distinguished service to the organization at the highest level, Dunlap was fired from his job, evicted from his residence at the world headquarters, and finally disfellowshipped. That's what it was called back then, disfellowshipped. For newer witnesses, it's worth remembering that in 1980, it was strictly forbidden to even speak to someone disfellowshipped. That meant that overnight, lifelong friends, the closest family ties, and any form of emotional support within the community were all lost. But there's more. Edward Dunlap suffered from a chronic illness known as trigeminal neuralgia, considered one of the most painful conditions a human being can endure. The slightest touch, a draft of air, or even the simple act of brushing his teeth could trigger attacks of stabbing, blinding pain. Some patients have even taken their own lives due to the unbearable intensity of this illness. So, to all of the above, add this. Edward Dunlap was left out on the street, with no health insurance, no severance pay, and completely isolated from the community to which he had given his entire life. To make the comparison clearer, Hans Kung wrote books against the central dogma of the Catholic Church. Desmond Ford gave lectures before thousands of people questioning essential Adventist doctrines. Neither of them was expelled from their respective churches. They lived until their deaths with the appreciation of their fellow believers. In contrast, Edward Dunlap merely shared his views in private with a few trusted friends, and yet he was completely cut off from the Jehovah's Witness organization in the cruel and ruthless way we've already described. Can I confess something? These are the kinds of things that make me ashamed of having been a Jehovah's Witness. And it's not as if this were just an isolated case. If you are, or have ever been, one of Jehovah's Witnesses, you know what happens if you dare to question the teachings of the governing body. And since it often happens that people show up here trying to cover up the obvious, let me share the following with you from the Elders textbook, the publication Shepherd the Flock of God. That book, in Chapter 12, titled Determining Whether a Judicial Committee Should Be Formed, says the following. Deliberately spreading teachings contrary to Bible truth, that is, teachings contrary to the governing body's interpretation of the Bible, any with sincere doubts regarding the Bible truth taught by Jehovah's Witnesses should be helped. Loving assistance should be provided. If one obstinately is speaking about or deliberately spreading false teachings, notice that just talking about them is enough. This may be or may lead to apostasy. If there is no response after a first and a second admonition, a judicial committee should be formed. And you know what it means when a judicial committee, or as they now call it, a committee of elders, is formed. It means that if you don't repent, as they put it, or in other words, if you stand firm in your position, you'll be removed from the congregation, and neither your witness family nor your witness friends will even be allowed to socialize with you. Don't you think it's one of life's great ironies that, After analyzing these 3 cases, the church with the worst reputation for tolerance, the Catholic Church, was precisely the one that treated those who think differently with the most compassion, while the religion that showed the greatest coldness, cruelty, and even hatred toward the dissenter was none other than Jehovah's Witnesses, the self-proclaimed only true religion and supposed champions of freedom of conscience. Let me ask you something. Do you want this content to reach more and more people who need it? It's very easy and it doesn't cost a thing. Just subscribe, hit the notification bell, leave a like, and share this video with anyone you think it could help. Thank you for being part of this project. See you soon.